The summer sun beat down mercilessly on Whispering Creek as Emma Clarke stood before the town council, her tear-stained face flushed with desperation. "I tell you, Sheriff Dawson took everything from me, my land, my father's gold. He threatened to kill me if I spoke out," she cried, her voice breaking as the 5 stern-faced men exchanged skeptical glances. It was 1876 in the Colorado Territory, a land where justice often came from the barrel of a gun rather than a courtroom. Emma, 22 and newly orphaned, had inherited her father's modest ranch only to find herself the target of the corrupt sheriff, who'd long coveted the property's hidden value. "Miss Clarke," intoned Mayor Wilson, his gray mustache twitching with annoyance, "these are serious accusations against a respected lawman. Without evidence, we cannot simply take the word of an emotional woman. I have proof." Emma insisted, reaching into her reticule for the deed her father had entrusted to her before his passing. But she found nothing. The document was gone, likely stolen during one of Sheriff Dawson's intimidating visits to her home. A murmur rippled through the small crowd gathered in the town hall. Among them stood Samuel Kincaid, a 30-year-old cowboy who'd ridden into town just days ago. His weathered face remained impassive beneath the shadow of his hat, but his eyes, keen as a hawk's, missed nothing of the scene unfolding before him. "Miss Clarke," continued the mayor with barely concealed impatience, "we've heard your claims 3 times now, and still you bring us nothing but tears and tales. This council has real business to attend to." "They're not tales." Emma's voice rose with frustration. "He threatened me at gunpoint. He said no one would believe me, that I'm just a woman alone." "That's enough," snapped Councilman Peters. "Sheriff Dawson is out tracking those Barlow boys who robbed the stage. When he returns, we'll mention your concerns. Until then, I suggest you compose yourself." Emma's shoulders slumped in defeat as the council moved on to other matters. She turned away, her blue eyes brimming with fresh tears, and pushed through the crowd toward the door. The townsfolk parted around her like water around a stone, their faces a mixture of pity and discomfort. Samuel had heard enough. He'd come to Whispering Creek with his own mission, tracking down his brother's killer, but something about the desperate young woman stirred something in his conscience. He'd seen corruption like this before, seen how power could be wielded against those who couldn't fight back. He followed Emma out into the dusty street, keeping a respectful distance as she walked briskly toward the edge of town. Her simple blue dress was faded but clean, her honey-brown hair pulled back in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. There was dignity in her posture despite her circumstances. "Miss Clarke," he called softly when they'd left the bustle of the main street behind. She whirled, eyes flashing with alarm. One hand flew to her throat while the other reached for something in her pocket, a small derringer, he guessed. Smart woman. "I don't mean any harm," Samuel said, holding up his hands. "I was in the meeting. I heard what you said about the sheriff." "Come to tell me I'm hysterical too?" Her voice was bitter, though the tremor in it betrayed her fear. Samuel shook his head. "No, madam, I came to tell you I believe you." Emma stared at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery or deception. Samuel met her gaze steadily, his green eyes clear and direct beneath the brim of his worn leather hat. "Why would you believe a stranger?" she finally asked, wariness still evident in her stance. "Because I've seen men like Dawson before," he answered simply. "Men who think a badge gives them the right to take what isn't theirs, and because I've never seen an innocent person cry the way you did in there." Emma's composure faltered. "It doesn't matter if you believe me, no one who can help does. My father's ranch will be auctioned in 3 days for unpaid taxes we paid in full before he died." Her voice broke. "Sheriff Dawson already has a buyer lined up, one of his friends from Denver." Samuel glanced back toward town, his jaw tightening. "Is there proof? Something that could show the council what Dawson's really done?" "My father kept records of everything, receipts for the taxes, the original deed showing our mineral rights, letters from the territorial governor approving our claim." She lowered her voice. "There's a small silver vein on our property, nothing spectacular but enough to make the land valuable. Sheriff Dawson found out somehow. Where are these papers now? Hidden. I moved them when Dawson started coming around. They're in a lockbox buried under the floorboards in the barn. She hesitated. But I can't go back there alone. He has men watching the property. Samuel considered her words, weighing his own priorities against the injustice before him. His brother's killer had last been seen heading toward Santa Fe, not lingering here. A few days' delay wouldn't change much now. I'll help you retrieve them, he said finally. Hope flickered across Emma's face before suspicion returned. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Let's just say I've got my own reasons to dislike corrupt lawmen, Samuel replied. Besides, my ma raised me not to ride past trouble when I could do something about it. Emma studied him taking in his trail-worn clothes, the Colt revolver holstered at his hip, and the quiet confidence in his stance. He wasn't a large man, but there was a capable strength to him, a steadiness she instinctively trusted. The woman said, "They don't believe my tears," the cowboy whispered. "Then I'll cry beside you." "I can't pay you," she said, not asking for payment. It could be dangerous. Samuel's mouth curved in a faint smile. "Most worthwhile things are." After a moment's hesitation, Emma nodded. "My property is about 3 miles east of town. If we go now, we might get there before dark." They parted briefly to make preparations. Samuel collected his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Cooper, from the livery stable, checking his saddlebags to ensure he had ammunition for both his Colt and the Winchester rifle secured in its scabbard. Emma met him at the eastern edge of town as promised, mounted on a dappled gray mare. She changed into a riding skirt and carried a small bundle of provisions. "Dawson usually has one of his deputies ride past at sundown," she explained as they set off. "A man named Tucker, mean as a rattler and twice as quick to strike. Anyone else likely to be around?" "Not usually, but Dawson's been unpredictable lately. Ever since my father died, he's been pressing harder." She glanced at Samuel. "Pa had a bad fall in the mine shaft. Everyone called it an accident, but—" "You think differently?" Samuel asked quietly. Emma's hands tightened on the reins. "Pa wasn't careless. He knew that mine like the back of his hand. And the day before he died, he told me Dawson had made him an offer for the property, said things would go badly if he didn't sell." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills dotted with scrub pine and juniper, the jagged peaks of distant mountains cutting a sharp line against the azure sky. "That's it," Emma said eventually, pointing to a modest cabin nestled in a small valley. A weathered barn stood nearby, alongside a corral where a few horses grazed. Home. Samuel's experienced eye took in the strategic layout of the property, the cabin positioned to catch the morning sun, but sheltered from winter winds by the hillside, the well-maintained fences, the small garden plot. Old Jacob Clarke had built himself a good place here. As they approached, Samuel held up a hand. "Hold back a moment." He stood in his stirrups, scanning the property carefully. "Smoke from the chimney. Someone's there." Emma tensed. "We keep no hands, and I've been staying in town since." She didn't finish the sentence. Samuel slipped the Winchester from its scabbard. "Stay here. Keep to the trees. If you hear shooting, ride back to town." "No," Emma said firmly, drawing the small derringer from her pocket. "This is my home. I'm coming with you." Their eyes met in a silent battle of wills, and Samuel recognized the steel beneath her gentle exterior. He nodded once. "Stay behind me, then." They approached cautiously, leaving their horses tied in a stand of pines. As they crept closer, voices drifted from the cabin, men's voices, rough with laughter. Through the window, Samuel could make out 3 figures inside. "That's Tucker by the fire," Emma whispered, pointing to a lean, hard-faced man cleaning a revolver. "The big one is Miller, another of Dawson's deputies. The third one I don't know." "They're searching for something," Samuel observed, watching as Miller tossed books from a shelf. "Your papers, most likely." "They won't find them in there," Emma said. "But we need to get to the barn without being seen." Samuel assessed their options. The straightforward approach would be to confront the men, but that risked a gunfight against 3 armed opponents, poor odds even for him. Stealth was their better choice. There's a gully that runs behind the barn, Emma suggested. We can follow it up from the south. The path she indicated would take them in a wide arc, keeping the barn between them and the cabin. Samuel nodded his approval and they set off, moving carefully through the underbrush. They had almost reached the barn when the cabin door banged open. Tucker emerged, stretching and lighting a cigarette. Samuel pulled Emma down behind a water trough as the deputy scanned the property, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. "Hurry up in there." Tucker called back toward the cabin. "Sheriff wants us back in town before dark. Ain't nothing here anyway," came Miller's voice as he joined Tucker outside. "Just some old clothes and books." The third man appeared in the doorway. "We should check the barn again. Maybe the girl came back." Samuel felt Emma tense beside him. They were trapped. Going forward would expose them to the deputies, but retreating now risked being spotted. "You two go ahead," Tucker said, flicking his cigarette away. "I need to take a piss." As Tucker headed toward the outhouse, the other two men started toward the barn. Samuel made a quick decision. "When they come in, we'll hide in the hayloft," he whispered to Emma. "Let's move now while they're split up." They slipped inside the barn's side door just as Miller and the unknown deputy approached the main entrance. Samuel spotted a ladder leading to the hayloft and nudged Emma toward it. She climbed quickly, disappearing into the shadowy upper level as the barn door creaked open below. Samuel followed, pulling himself into the loft just as the deputies entered. From their hidden vantage point, they watched as the men began a desultory search, more interested in complaining than in thoroughness. "This is a waste of time," Miller grumbled, kicking at a pile of straw. "Even if the girl hid something, she wouldn't leave it where we could find it." The other deputy grunted in agreement. "Dawson's getting nervous. Auction's in 3 days. If those papers show up before then—" "They won't," Miller said confidently. "And even if they did, who's going to stand against Dawson in this town? That girl's got no one." Their casual cruelty made Samuel's blood boil, but he remained still, one hand on Emma's arm to keep her from revealing herself. Her eyes blazed with fury in the dim light, but she maintained her composure. The deputies continued their half-hearted search for a few more minutes before Miller checked his pocket watch. "Let's get Tucker and head back. Nothing here worth finding." As soon as the men left the barn, Emma moved to the edge of the loft. "The floorboard's near the stall," she whispered. "That's where the lockbox is." They waited until they heard horses riding away before descending from their hiding place. Emma went straight to the third stall, knelt on the straw-covered floor, and began feeling for something. After a moment, her fingers caught on a small gap between the boards. She pried one up, then another, revealing a hollow space beneath. "Here," she said, reaching down to extract a metal box about the size of a small book. Her hands trembled slightly as she produced a key from around her neck and unlocked it. Inside lay a stack of neatly folded papers, which she quickly rifled through. The tax receipts, the deed with the mineral rights clearly marked, and she paused, pulling out several folded letters. "These are from my father to the territorial governor detailing Dawson's threats." Her voice caught. "Pa was building a case against him. That's why Dawson killed him." Samuel touched her shoulder gently. "This is enough to take to the authorities in Denver," he said. "But we need to get off your property before those men realize what we've found." Emma nodded, replacing the papers and locking the box. "There's an old trapper's cabin in the hills west of here. We can shelter there tonight and ride for Denver in the morning." They retraced their steps to where their horses waited, moving quickly but carefully through the gathering dusk. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky by the time they reached the pine grove. "Something's wrong," Samuel said suddenly, drawing his gun. "The horses are too quiet." A deep voice cut through the twilight. "That's because they know better than to make noise when there's a gun pointed at them." Sheriff Dawson stepped from behind a tree, his revolver aimed squarely at Samuel's chest. He was a big man with cold eyes and a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. Behind him stood Tucker, rifle raised. "Well, well," Dawson drawled, "if it isn't Miss Clarke and some drifter." "Trespassing on property that's under government lien, I believe." "It's my property," Emma said, clutching the lockbox to her chest. "And I have proof that you falsified those tax records." Dawson's eyes narrowed as they fixed on the box. Tucker relieved the lady of her burden. Tucker moved forward, but Samuel shifted to block his path. The lady keeps her property, Sheriff, and will be taking this evidence to the territorial governor. Dawson's laugh held no humor. You won't make it to the end of my county, cowboy. Drop your gun or Tucker here will put a hole in you. The tension stretched between them like a taut wire. Samuel knew his chances weren't good even if he managed to take down Dawson. Tucker would likely get him with the rifle. But surrendering meant certain death for both him and Emma once Dawson had the papers. I count 3 guns against your 1, stranger, Dawson said smugly. Those aren't odds I'd bet on. Then your counting's off, came a new voice as the distinctive sound of a shotgun being cocked cut through the air. I make it 2 against 2. An older man stepped into view, a double-barreled shotgun leveled at Tucker. He was lean and weathered, with graying hair and the steady hands of someone who knew how to use the weapon he carried. Hank, Emma exclaimed, I thought you were in Denver. Got back yesterday, the man replied without taking his eyes off Tucker. Heard about the council meeting, figured you might need help, so I've been watching the place. He jerked his chin toward Dawson. Drop the iron, Sheriff. Unlike you, I don't make threats I can't back up. Dawson's confidence wavered visibly as he assessed the changed situation. You're interfering with official business, Patterson. Funny kind of official business that involves ambushing folks in the woods, Hank replied evenly. Now drop the gun before I decide 2 barrels of buckshot is the answer to all my problems. With a curse, Dawson lowered his weapon. Samuel quickly moved to disarm both him and Tucker, collecting their guns with practiced efficiency. Emma has something to show you, Hank, Samuel said, never taking his eyes off the 2 lawmen. Emma opened the lockbox and extracted the papers. Pa left evidence. Records of the real tax payments, copies of letters detailing Dawson's threats. He was building a case. Hank nodded grimly. Jacob always was thorough, told me he was worried about something before I left for Denver but wouldn't say what. He knew too much, Dawson spat. Just like his daughter, this doesn't end here. I own half the territory. Officials from here to Samuel silenced him with a sharp blow to the jaw that sent the corrupt sheriff staggering. That's enough out of you. What do we do with them? Emma asked, looking at the 2 men with distaste. Hank considered for a moment. Tie them up. I'll send word to Marshal Reynolds in Silverton. He's been suspicious of Dawson for years, said as much when I ran into him in Denver. He'll be mighty interested in those papers you're holding. Using rope from their saddlebags, they bound Dawson and Tucker securely. Hank volunteered to guard the prisoners while Samuel and Emma rode to his cabin for the night, planning to set out for Silverton at first light. The cabin was small but well-maintained, tucked away in a sheltered valley with a clear spring nearby. As they settled the horses and prepared a simple meal, Emma told Samuel about Hank Patterson, her father's oldest friend and former partner in the silver claim. Pa sent him to Denver to quietly inquire about filing charges against Dawson, she explained as they sat before the fire. I didn't know he'd returned, Samuel nodded. Fortunate timing. For both of us, Emma said softly, studying him across the flickering light. I never asked why you were in Whispering Creek to begin with. Samuel was silent for a long moment, weighing how much to share. Finally, he set down his coffee cup and met her gaze. I'm looking for someone. The man who killed my brother 6 months ago in a saloon in Abilene, shot him in the back over a card game. I'm sorry, Emma said, genuine compassion in her eyes. Your brother, were you close? As close as brothers could be, raised each other after our parents died in '62, influenza. His voice was steady, but the pain behind his words was evident. Matthew was the steady one, had a homestead in Kansas, a wife expecting their first child. I was the drifter, always moving on to the next place, the next job. And now I'm tracking the man who destroyed their future. Last I heard, he was headed this way. Samuel stared into the fire. His name's Callahan, red-haired man with a scar down his right cheek. Emma shook her head. I don't know anyone fitting that description in Whispering Creek. I didn't expect to find him here, Samuel admitted. Just passing through on my way to Santa Fe, but then I saw you at that council meeting and He shrugged, a slight smile touching his lips. Some things a man can't walk away from. They fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled lonely and determined. "You should get some sleep," Samuel said eventually. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Emma nodded but made no move to retire. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing me when no one else would." Their eyes met across the flames, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood loss and injustice all too well. "We should reach Silverton by midday tomorrow if we start early," Samuel said, changing the subject. "Marshal Reynolds can send men back for Dawson and Tucker." "And then," Emma asked. Samuel hesitated. "And then I continue to Santa Fe, I suppose." A flicker of disappointment crossed Emma's face, quickly masked. "Of course, you have your own justice to seek." Before Samuel could respond, a sound outside caught his attention, the soft crunch of footsteps on pine needles. He moved swiftly to the window, gun already drawn. "Someone's out there," he whispered, gesturing for Emma to move away from the firelight. They doused the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness except for the faint glow of embers in the hearth. Samuel positioned himself by the door while Emma took up the Winchester, her stance showing she knew how to handle the weapon. The footsteps came closer, then stopped at the door. A moment of silence, then 3 sharp knocks. "Emma, it's Hank, open up." Samuel exchanged a glance with Emma before cautiously opening the door. Hank stood there, out of breath and grim-faced. "Miller found Tucker and Dawson," he said without preamble. "Cut them loose. They're gathering men in town, deputizing anyone who will hold a gun. They'll be coming for the papers and for you both." Emma's face paled. "How many?" "8, maybe 10 by now," Hank replied. "Dawson's offering $20 to any man who brings in the rustlers who attacked him." "Most don't know the real story, just see a chance to earn more than a month's wages in a night." Samuel considered their options. "We need to leave now, head straight for Silverton under cover of darkness." Hank shook his head. "They've got men watching the main trails. But I know another way, an old mining route through the high country. It's rough going, especially at night, but it'll get you to Silverton by tomorrow evening if you push hard." "You're not coming with us?" Emma asked, already gathering her things. "Someone needs to slow them down," Hank said simply. "I'll lead them north toward the territorial border. By the time they realize they're on the wrong trail, you'll be halfway to Silverton." Emma embraced the older man fiercely. "Be careful, Hank, I can't lose you too." "You focus on getting those papers to Marshal Reynolds," Hank replied, his voice gruff with emotion. "Your pa was my best friend. Least I can do is make sure his killer faces justice." Within minutes, they had saddled the horses and packed their minimal supplies. Hank provided them with detailed directions for the mountain trail, along with extra ammunition for their journey. "One more thing," Hank said as they prepared to depart. He pressed a folded paper into Emma's hand. "Your father wrote this the day before he died. Asked me to give it to you if anything happened to him. Never found the right time before now." Emma stared at the letter, her hand trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. With a final exchange of nods between Samuel and Hank, they set off into the darkness. Hank would wait an hour before riding north, creating a false trail for Dawson's men to follow. The night was clear but moonless as they picked their way through the foothills. Samuel led, his eyes adjusted to the darkness, following the landmarks Hank had described: a lightning-struck pine, a distinctive rock formation that resembled a bear's head, a narrow pass between twin boulders. They rode in silence, alert for any sound that might indicate pursuit. Emma kept pace steadily, her determination evident in every line of her body despite the grueling climb. As they ascended higher into the mountains, the air grew colder and thin. Their breath fogged in the darkness, and the horses moved more carefully on the increasingly treacherous path. "We should rest the horses," Samuel said finally, reining in at a small plateau sheltered by overhanging rocks. "Just for an hour." They dismounted stiffly, leading the tired animals to a patch of sparse grass. While the horses grazed, Samuel and Emma shared jerky and water from their canteens, huddling close for warmth in the mountain chill. "My father's letter," Emma said suddenly, withdrawing the folded paper from her pocket. "I haven't had the courage to read it yet." Samuel nodded, understanding her hesitation. "Would you like some privacy?" "No," she said, her voice small but resolved. "Stay, please." In the faint starlight, Emma unfolded the letter with careful fingers. She had to squint to make out the words, but her father's familiar handwriting brought immediate tears to her eyes. "My dearest Emma," she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you're reading this, then my fears have proven true and Dawson has made good on his threats. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the full extent of the danger. I thought I could protect you by keeping you unaware." Samuel remained silent, offering the quiet support of his presence as Emma continued. "The silver vein is richer than I've let on rich enough to make men kill for it. Dawson discovered this when he intercepted assay reports meant for the territorial office. What he doesn't know is that I've registered the claim in your name as well as mine. Even if the worst happens to me, the property remains legally yours." Emma paused, drawing a shaky breath before reading on. "Trust Hank. He knows everything and will help you prove what Dawson has done. And Emma, remember what your mother always said: your tears are precious things, not to be wasted on those who don't deserve them. Be brave, my daughter. Your mother and I watch over you always. All my love, Father." The letter trembled in Emma's hands as she finished reading. Samuel gently covered her fingers with his own, steadying her. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew Dawson would kill him, and still he stood his ground." "He was protecting your future," Samuel said softly, "as fathers do." Emma carefully refolded the letter and tucked it away. "We should keep moving," she said, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "Dawn isn't far off." They continued their journey as the eastern sky began to lighten, revealing the breathtaking expanse of mountains surrounding them. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to lead the horses through particularly treacherous sections. By mid-morning, they had reached the highest point of their route, a narrow ridge offering views that stretched for miles in every direction. They paused briefly, scanning the landscape below for any sign of pursuit. "There," Samuel said, pointing to a distant plume of dust far to the north. "Riders, moving fast." Emma squinted against the sunlight. "Dawson's men, likely, but they're on the wrong trail, just as Hank planned." Samuel's admiration for the old prospector's cunning was evident in his voice. "We should keep moving. The descent will be faster, but no less dangerous." The journey down the western slope of the mountains was indeed treacherous. Loose shale made footing precarious, and several times they nearly lost their balance on the steep trail. By early afternoon, however, the path widened and became more manageable as they entered a forested valley. "Silverton should lie just beyond that ridge," Samuel said, gesturing ahead. "Another 2 hours' ride, I'd guess." Emma nodded, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. They had been riding or walking for nearly 20 hours with only the briefest of rests. Even so, determination kept her moving forward. They had just entered a clearing when Samuel suddenly reined in, his posture alert. Riders coming. Fast. Before they could retreat to the cover of the trees, 4 mounted men burst into the clearing from the south, a direction they hadn't anticipated danger from. Samuel recognized Tucker among them, his face twisted with malice. "There they are," Tucker shouted, drawing his gun. "Get them." Samuel's Colt was in his hand instantly. "Emma, run," he shouted, firing a warning shot over the approaching riders' heads. The men scattered, taking cover behind trees at the edge of the clearing. Emma urged her horse toward the northern tree line, but a shot rang out, causing the animal to rear in panic. She clung to the saddle, fighting to control the frightened mare. Samuel positioned himself between Emma and the gunmen, returning fire methodically. One of Tucker's men cried out and fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. "You're outnumbered, Kincaid," Tucker called. "Give us the girl and the papers, and maybe we'll let you ride out of here alive." "Not going to happen, Tucker," Samuel replied calmly, using a fallen log for cover. He glanced at Emma, who had managed to control her horse and had drawn her derringer. "Head for those rocks," he told her quietly. "I'll cover you." Emma hesitated. "I won't leave you here alone." Trust me, Samuel insisted. I'll be right behind you. With visible reluctance, Emma urged her horse toward the outcropping Samuel had indicated a defensive position that would provide better cover than their current exposed location. Samuel laid down a barrage of covering fire as she made her dash. Tucker and his remaining men were forced to keep their heads down, giving Emma precious seconds to reach safety. Once she was positioned among the rocks, Samuel prepared to make his own move. He reloaded quickly, counted to 3, then sprang onto his horse and galloped toward Emma's position. Bullets kicked up dirt around him, one grazing his arm with a burning sting. He ignored the pain, focused only on reaching the relative safety of the rocky outcropping. Cooper, sensing his rider's urgency, ran as if the devil himself were at their heels. Samuel had almost reached the rocks when a shot cracked from somewhere to his right, a position he hadn't accounted for. Pain exploded in his side as the bullet found its mark, knocking him sideways in the saddle. Through sheer force of will, he managed to stay mounted until he reached Emma. "Samuel," she cried as he half fell, half dismounted beside her. Blood was spreading across his shirt, turning the blue fabric a dark, ominous crimson. "I'll be all right," he grunted, pressing a hand to the wound. "Just a graze." They both knew it was more than that, but there was no time to argue. Tucker and his men were regrouping, preparing to rush their position. "We're pinned down," Emma said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Silverton is still miles away." Samuel checked his ammunition, 3 bullets in his Colt, perhaps 15 for the Winchester. Not enough for a prolonged firefight. A shout from Tucker interrupted his calculations. "Last chance, Kincaid, throw out those papers, or we're coming in after you and the girl won't like what happens next." Samuel's jaw tightened at the implicit threat. He glanced at Emma, saw the determination in her face despite her fear, and made a decision. "When I start firing, you make a run for it," he told her quietly. "Take Cooper, he's faster. Get those papers to Silverton." Emma's eyes widened. "No. I won't leave you here to die." "Someone has to get through," Samuel insisted. "Your father deserves justice, Emma, so do you." For a moment she looked as though she might continue arguing, then her expression shifted, resolve hardening her delicate features. "We go together," she said firmly, reaching into her saddlebag. She withdrew a small canvas pouch and thrust it at him. "Mining powder. Pa always carried some for clearing rock falls." Samuel stared at the explosive, then back at Emma, understanding dawning, create a distraction. "Exactly." She gestured to a cluster of boulders positioned above where Tucker and his men had gathered. "One good blast could trigger a slide, not enough to kill them, but enough to cover our escape." It was risky dangerously, but it offered a chance for both of them to get away. Samuel nodded once, already calculating the best placement for maximum effect. "I'll need to get closer," he said, checking the wound in his side. The bleeding had slowed, but pain radiated with every movement. "Can you provide covering fire?" Emma took up the Winchester, her handling of the rifle confirming what Samuel had suspected Jacob Clarke had taught his daughter to shoot, and taught her well. "On your signal," she said simply. Samuel moved cautiously from their shelter, staying low and using the terrain for cover. Tucker and his men were focused on the main outcropping where Emma remained visible just enough to draw their attention without exposing herself to their fire. The pain in Samuel's side grew worse with each step. But he forced himself forward, the pouch of blasting powder clutched in his hand. He needed to get close enough to the base of the boulder pile to ensure the blast would have the desired effect. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he placed the charges, using skills learned during his brief time working railroad construction after the war. The setup was crude but would serve their purpose if luck was with them. As he prepared to light the short fuse, a voice rang out from behind him. "Hold it right there, mister." Samuel froze, then slowly turned to find himself staring down the barrel of a revolver held by a deputy he hadn't seen before, likely the 4th man who'd been positioned as a lookout. "Tucker," the deputy called. "Got him over here." Samuel knew he had only seconds before the others arrived. The fuse lay unlit at his feet, the carefully placed charges useless without it. "Don't move," the deputy warned, his gun steady despite his youth. He couldn't have been more than 20, with a wispy attempt at a mustache and nervous eyes. "You're making a mistake, son," Samuel said calmly. "Sheriff Dawson isn't the man you think he is." "Shut up. Tucker says you attacked the sheriff and stole some papers." The young man's voice wavered slightly. "That's all I need to know." Samuel heard approaching footsteps, Tucker and the others coming to investigate their comrade's shout. If they reached him, all would be lost. "The woman over there," Samuel said, nodding toward Emma's position. "She's Jacob Clarke's daughter. Dawson killed her father for his silver claim. The papers prove it." Doubt flickered across the young deputy's face. "Old man Clarke had an accident in his mine. Everyone knows that." "Is that what Tucker told you?" Samuel pressed, aware that the footsteps were getting closer. "Ask yourself why Dawson is so desperate to get those papers if he has nothing to hide." The deputy's resolve visibly wavered. I don't." A shot rang out from Emma's position, striking a tree near the approaching men and forcing them to take cover. The momentary distraction was all Samuel needed. He lunged forward, knocking the deputy's gun aside and delivering a solid punch that sent the young man sprawling. Samuel snatched up the fallen matches, struck one against a rock, and touched it to the fuse. It sputtered to life, burning rapidly toward the charges. "Fire in the hole," he shouted, diving for cover as Tucker and his men realized what was happening. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, sending a shower of rocks and debris cascading down the hillside. Tucker and his men scattered, running for their lives as boulders crashed around them. Samuel didn't wait to see the outcome. He sprinted back to Emma, ignoring the fresh blood soaking his shirt from his reopened wound. "Now," he gasped, helping her mount Cooper while he swung up onto her mare, "ride hard and don't look back." They galloped north through the ensuing chaos, the sounds of falling rocks and men's shouts fading behind them. The explosion had done its job, creating enough confusion and debris to cover their escape. They rode hard for nearly an hour, pushing the horses to their limits before Emma finally called for a halt. "Samuel, you're bleeding badly," she said, dismounting quickly to help him down. "We need to tend that wound." Samuel couldn't argue. The adrenaline that had carried him through their escape was fading, leaving him light-headed and weak. He slid from the saddle, stumbling as his boots hit the ground. Emma caught him, surprisingly strong for her slight frame, and helped him to a sheltered spot beneath a cluster of aspens. She eased him down against a tree trunk and quickly set about examining his injury. "The bullet went through clean," she said after carefully cutting away his bloodied shirt. "That's fortunate, but you've lost a lot of blood." She worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with water from their canteen and bandaging it with strips torn from her petticoat. Samuel watched her face as she worked, the concentration in her blue eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the gentle competence of her hands. "Where did you learn to tend wounds?" he asked, his voice rough with pain. A small smile touched her lips. "Living on a remote claim with only my father and occasional miners for company, I had to learn many things. Pa said a Clarke never relies on others for what they can do themselves." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Emma said softly, tying off the bandage, "and stubborn. Like his daughter, he always said." She sat back on her heels, assessing her work. "This will hold for now, but we need to get you to a proper doctor in Silverton." Samuel nodded, then winced as pain lanced through his side. "How far do you reckon?" "Less than an hour's ride, according to Hank's directions." Emma glanced at the sun's position. "If we continue now, we'll reach town before dusk." "What about Tucker and his men?" "The landslide will have slowed them considerably, if not stopped them altogether." She helped Samuel to his feet. "Can you ride?" He managed a wry smile. "I'll manage." The final leg of their journey passed in a haze of pain for Samuel. He focused on staying upright in the saddle, on following Emma's steady lead as they wound their way through the forested foothills toward Silverton. The town appeared before them just as the sun began its descent behind the western mountains, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley, with the telltale head frames of active mines dotting the surrounding hillsides. "There," Emma said with relief evident in her voice. "We made it." They rode directly to the marshal's office, a solid brick building on the main street. Marshal Reynolds was a tall, gray-haired man with keen eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately commanded respect. "Miss Clarke," he said, recognition dawning as Emma introduced herself. "Hank Patterson spoke of you when I saw him in Denver, said your father had concerns about Sheriff Dawson." Emma produced the lockbox containing her father's papers. "More than concerns, Marshal, evidence of corruption, threats, and I believe murder." While the marshal examined the documents, his deputy helped Samuel to the town doctor's office. Emma accompanied them, refusing to leave Samuel's side despite the marshal's assurances that he would handle everything. "You should stay with Reynolds," Samuel told her as the doctor began cleaning his wound properly. "Make sure he understands the urgency." Emma shook her head stubbornly. "The papers speak for themselves, and you need someone to ensure you don't try to leave before that wound is properly healed." There was something in her voice, a tenderness beneath the practical concern, that made Samuel's heart beat a little faster, despite his weakened state. The doctor confirmed Emma's initial assessment. The bullet had passed through without hitting any vital organs, but blood loss and the rigors of their journey had taken a toll. Samuel would need several days of rest before he could safely travel again. "You're lucky, young man," the doctor said as he finished bandaging the wound. "A fraction to the left and we'd be having a very different conversation." Emma arranged for rooms at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Hollister, a kind but no-nonsense woman who took one look at Samuel's pale face and declared he needed bedrest and good food in that order. For 2 days, Samuel drifted between sleep and wakefulness, his body working to repair itself from both the gunshot wound and the exhaustion of their ordeal. Emma was a constant presence, bringing broth and bread when he could eat, reading to him from the local newspaper when restlessness made him irritable. On the 3rd morning, he woke feeling stronger, the worst of the fever having passed during the night. Sunlight streamed through the small window of his room, and the sounds of the bustling mining town filtered up from the street below. Emma entered carrying a breakfast tray, her face lighting with pleasure when she saw him sitting up. "You look better today," she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Some color back in your face." "Feel better," Samuel agreed, suddenly aware of his unbuttoned shirt and unshaven state. "Any news from Marshal Reynolds?" Emma nodded, pouring him a cup of coffee. "He sent telegrams to the territorial governor and to Denver yesterday. A federal marshal is being dispatched to arrest Dawson." Her expression grew solemn. "They found Hank." Samuel's stomach tightened with dread. "Is he?" "Alive," Emma assured him quickly, "but hurt." Dawson's men caught up with him near the territorial border, shot him in the leg and left him for dead. Some trappers found him and brought him to the doctor in Cedar Ridge. Relief washed over Samuel. "He's a tough old bird." "Indeed," Emma agreed with a fond smile. "The doctor says he'll recover, though he may always walk with a limp. Marshal Reynolds sent word that we've reached Silverton safely with the papers." Samuel sipped his coffee, studying Emma over the rim of the cup. There was a new confidence in her bearing, a quiet strength that had always been there but now shone clearly. The frightened, desperate young woman from the town council meeting had been replaced by someone who knew her own worth and power. "What will you do now?" he asked. "With your father's claim, I mean." Emma sat on the edge of the chair beside his bed, considering. "I'm not sure. The mine still has value, but I have no desire to run it myself. Perhaps I'll sell it to someone who will employ local men fairly." She paused, then added softly, "I've been thinking about opening a school. Whispering Creek has none, and the children there deserve better than ignorance." "A teacher," Samuel said, finding the idea suited her perfectly. "Your father would be proud. And you?" Emma asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Will you continue to Santa Fe once you're healed? To find your brother's killer?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Samuel had asked himself the same thing repeatedly during his hours of enforced rest. "I've been considering that," he said slowly. "Vengeance is a lonely trail and not always a righteous one." He set down his coffee cup. "Matthew wouldn't want me to throw away my life chasing his ghost. He'd want me to live really live." Emma's expression softened. And what would living really look like for Samuel Kincaid? Before he could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. Marshal Reynolds entered, hat in hand, his expression grave. "Miss Clarke, Mr. Kincaid," he greeted them. "I've just received troubling news. Sheriff Dawson has fled. Abandoned his post and disappeared sometime in the night. Took whatever money he could gather and ran." Emma's face fell. "So he escapes justice after all." The marshal shook his head. "Not for long. I've sent telegrams to every law enforcement office within 200 miles. His description is posted at every stage station and railroad depot. He won't get far, Miss Clarke, I promise you that." "Thank you, Marshal," Emma said, though disappointment was evident in her voice. After Reynolds departed, a heavy silence filled the room. Samuel watched as Emma moved to the window, her slender figure silhouetted against the morning light. "All this," she said finally, "and he might still escape." Samuel pushed himself up straighter in the bed, ignoring the twinge from his wound. "Reynolds is good at his job, Emma. Dawson will be caught. But will it bring my father back?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Will it erase the nights I spent terrified in my own home, the days spent begging for justice from men who saw only a hysterical woman?" Samuel wished he could go to her, take her in his arms and offer comfort, but his weakened state kept him confined to the bed. "No," he said honestly, "nothing can change what's happened, but you stood your ground, you fought back, and you won, Emma. Whether Dawson faces a judge's sentence or not, you've reclaimed what he tried to steal from you: your dignity, your home, your future." Emma turned from the window, tears glistening in her eyes but a small smile on her lips. "When you put it that way, it does sound like victory." She wiped away a stray tear. "I just wish." "What?" "I wish someone had believed me from the beginning, before all of this." Her voice grew softer. "Before we had to run for our lives and you were shot." Samuel extended his hand toward her, and after a moment's hesitation, Emma crossed the room to take it. Her fingers were warm and slender in his calloused palm. "The woman said, 'They don't believe my tears,'" he quoted softly, holding her gaze. "The cowboy whispered, 'Then I'll cry beside you.'" Fresh tears welled in Emma's eyes, but these were different, somehow cleansing rather than bitter. "You did," she whispered. "You stood beside me when no one else would." Samuel gently tugged her hand, drawing her down to sit on the edge of the bed. "And I'd do it again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Emma, I came to Whispering Creek hunting a ghost, but I found something I wasn't looking for." "What did you find?" she asked, her eyes never leaving his. "A reason to stop running, a reason to build something instead of tearing down." He reached up to brush a strand of honey-brown hair from her face. "If you'll have me, that is." A smile bloomed across Emma's face, transforming it with joy. "Samuel Kincaid, are you proposing to court me?" "I believe I am," he replied, matching her smile with his own. "Though I'm making a poor showing of it from a sict." Emma laughed, the sound bright and healing. "I think you've proven your worth quite thoroughly, Mr. Kincaid, riding into gunfire, taking a bullet, climbing mountains most suitors only manage flowers and poetry." "I could try poetry if you prefer," Samuel offered with mock seriousness. "Though I warn you, it would be terrible." "No need," Emma said, leaning forward to place a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Your actions have spoken clearly enough. The weeks that followed brought healing of many kinds." Samuel's wound closed and his strength returned under Emma's attentive care. News arrived that Sheriff Dawson had been apprehended trying to board a steamship in New Orleans. The federal marshals had been waiting for him, tipped off by a telegram from Silverton. Hank Patterson recovered enough to travel to Silverton, his weathered face breaking into a wide grin when he saw Emma and Samuel together. "About time you found someone worthy of you, girl," he told Emma with a wink. "Your pa would approve." In late summer, with the mountain wildflowers in full bloom, they returned to Whispering Creek. The town had changed in their absence, Dawson's corrupt regime replaced by an elected sheriff who had been a friend of Jacob Clark's. The council members who had dismissed Emma's pleas had been replaced in a special election, several women among the new leadership. Emma sold the silver claim to a mining cooperative formed by local men, including Hank, who would oversee operations to ensure fair practices. With the proceeds, she purchased land near the town center and began construction on a schoolhouse. Samuel found his own place in the community, his skills as a horseman and his steady character earning him respect. He took a position training horses for the stage line, work that kept him close to town while providing a good living. They were married that autumn, as the aspen leaves turned gold against the evergreen hillsides. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by the entire town and presided over by a circuit riding preacher who pronounced them husband and wife beneath the open Colorado sky. Later, as they danced at their wedding celebration, Samuel held Emma close and whispered, "No tears today." She smiled up at him, happiness radiating from her face. "None needed, but if they come someday, I know you'll be there to cry beside me. Always," he promised, sealing the vow with a kiss. 5 years later, Emma stood on the porch of their home on the outskirts of Whispering Creek, watching as Samuel taught their 4-year-old son Thomas to ride his pony in the fenced yard. Their daughter Rebecca, just turned 2, played with wooden blocks at Emma's feet, her dark curls so like her father's catching the afternoon sunlight. The schoolhouse in town had flourished under Emma's guidance, now employing 2 additional teachers to accommodate the growing population. Samuel's horse training business had expanded to include breeding stock that was sought after throughout the territory. Hank Patterson, now silver-haired but still sharp as ever, visited regularly, delighting the children with tales of the old mining days and serving as a beloved surrogate grandfather. Sheriff Dawson had died in prison the previous winter, but Emma had felt nothing at the news, neither joy nor sorrow, just a quiet acknowledgement that justice, however delayed, had finally been served. Her father's memory lived on in the scholarship fund she had established for promising students, ensuring that Jacob Clarke's legacy would be one of opportunity rather than tragedy. As Thomas successfully completed a circuit of the yard on his pony, Samuel lifted him down with a proud smile, then looked up to meet Emma's gaze across the distance. Even after 5 years, the connection between them remained as strong as it had been in those first desperate days, a bond forged in danger and strengthened by love. Samuel set Thomas on his feet and whispered something in the boy's ear. The child nodded eagerly and ran toward the porch, his face alight with excitement. "Mama," he called. "Papa says to tell you he loves you more than all the stars in the sky," Emma laughed, her heart full to bursting. "Tell your papa to come say that himself," she called back, gathering Rebecca into her arms. Samuel crossed the yard with his characteristic steady stride, the slight limp from his old wound barely noticeable now. As he climbed the porch steps, his green eyes held the same warmth they had when he'd first believed in her tears all those years ago. "I hear you have a message for me," Emma teased as he joined his family. Samuel's smile deepened, revealing the laugh lines that had formed at the corners of his eyes. "I believe I do," he said, wrapping his arms around both her and their daughter. Thomas pressed against his father's side, completing the circle. "I love you," Samuel said simply, the truth of it shining in his eyes. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." Emma stood on tiptoe to kiss him, their children giggling at the display. "And I love you, Samuel Kincaid, for believing in me when no one else would." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long golden shadows across their land, Emma knew with absolute certainty that whatever trials life might still bring, she would never face them alone. The woman's tears had been believed, and the cowboy who had promised to cry beside her had given her so much more: a family, a home, and a love that would endure through all their days.